Welcome back to the Paradigm Project. We are here with Madisen, who is a marriage and family therapist, and we're going to talk a little bit about relationships, connection. We're going to talk about mental health, and it's going to be an awesome episode.
Thanks for having me.
Looks like you chose to be a marriage and family, just kind of a relationship specialist therapist.
Yeah.
If that makes sense at all. So what made you interested in doing that as a profession?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question because it wasn't one of those things where I knew I wanted to be a therapist. I chose something that I liked studying, which was relationships. Relationships have always been a passion. I enjoy my own relationships and connections. I see a value in them. So when it was time to go to school, or rather, when I graduated high school and I was trying to figure out what to do next, I went to college and I started going to classes that were really social science based. And as I did that, I kind of more found my passions, which were, I did like some relationship education stuff. I did some family advocacy things, all that don't really have to do with therapy, but they provided a lot of really great opportunities to lead me that way. So when I graduated with my bachelor's degree from Brigham Young University, Idaho, in marriage and family studies, I was prepared for grad school. That's pretty much what that degree prepares you for, is to go to grad school. And then I went to Oklahoma State University for a master's degree in, I think the exact thing is in human development and family sciences with a specialization in marriage and family therapy. But so for me, it was very organic. It was just I started studying and reading books that I was interested in and thought, well, hey, why not make my homework something that I'm already doing, reading these books, researching these things.
Right, that's way cool.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you've done with your schooling. Do you have a plan of where you want to go? Do you want to do any more degrees, or what's kind of your future looking like?
That's a really good question as well. I don't know it at the current time. I am currently a therapist here in the community in South Jordan. I work at a private practice just up the street and full-time therapist there. I work with children, adolescents, adults, everything in between, however you would call that. Essentially everything under the sun as well. Individuals, families, marriages, relationships, co-parenting relationships, anything. And I'm enjoying that right now. When I originally went to grad school to get my degree in marriage and family therapy, I did want a PhD. And now I'm not sure. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Nice, yeah.
It's I think it's really nice. It has been nice to be able to adapt my plans and just walk through the doors that are opened. And if I did get a PhD, it would be because I do enjoy teaching. So I would want to be more of a professor than a researcher.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
In this little bio that we have, it says that you worked in Oklahoma for the county's school system, working with teens there. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. That was while I was there at OSU, and I worked there in the community. I think it was for not an hour and a half, a year and a half. I was there for a year and a half, and I would work with ages 12 to 18. I had an office, so people would come to me, or I would go to different schools and do therapy there. I would teach life skills. It was a life skills course that I would teach as well in the schools. And then I also had opportunities to go into people's houses as well, which was neat.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So, and you say that you study connections and relationships and family connections especially. Can you go a little bit deeper into that and explain kind of what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it kind of means something different for everybody and different at different stages of your life. You know, when you're a child, the most important connection you probably have is with your caregiver. And then as you get older, teens, you start to realize that friendships are really important and your family's still your home base, at least in an ideal world. But you start to branch off and start to connect more with the community. And so it's just a very natural way of life, and you kind of go on. And so there's different stages of life that it's kind of logical that connection would be important. And so for me personally, I had my own experiences where the connections that either I did or didn't have really made a difference in my own life. And so I saw value there. And so that's kind of was my interest, which I already touched on. But then when you actually study connection, you see that even like historically, there's evidence of the community, the tribes, the just natural desire to want to be connected to something outside of yourself, or even just connected to yourself.
Right.
Why do humans need or desire these connections?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so much research on this, and everybody has different aspects that they like to touch on, but my favorite thing about having studied connections and that innate need for a connection is simply because of the benefits that it has for us, right? We're able to think outside of ourselves, which is nice sometimes. We get in our own heads, and it's nice to get out sometimes. there's also opportunities for other people to share their perspective of us with them and our lives and kind of have that outside perspective that can be helpful. There are chemicals in our brains that are released when you're physically close with someone, when you're having an intimate conversation, or when you're hugging someone. There's different chemicals like dopamine and vasopressin and endorphins that are released that feel naturally good to our bodies. And there's one study that I think is the most fascinating, where they put monkeys in a cage and they had a pseudo mother.
Yeah.
So they had a fake mother set up, and they had one that was a wire monkey that had the milk, the food that the baby monkey could go to.
Yeah.
Then they had another one that didn't have the food, but it was wrapped in a towel, so it was soft. And what they found was just that these monkeys, they would cling to this monkey, this towel shaped as a monkey.
Yeah.
And then they would only leave for brief moments of time to go get their nourishment, and then come right back. So I think that really demonstrates that it is a need. It's a biological need that we have that's kind of innate within us.
That's interesting to think about. Like, a lot of the time, there's at least a lot of like posts on Instagram or like things that I see on a regular basis are like, work hard, be alone, do your own thing for a little bit. It's just that kind of like grind mindset where you're doing everything yourself. And by bringing up these connections, it's completely different. And it's a completely different aspect of, okay, yeah, you can totally grind alone, but you would be a lot happier and you'd have a lot more comfortable of a life if you had these connections that are worth having.
Yeah. Absolutely. And with that point, too, that, you might hear someone say, well, I prefer to work alone, or, well, I'm shy, or, well, I'm introverted. And this still applies to people who are shy and introverted. It still applies to people who are not interested in romantic relationships. It applies to people, it applies to everyone, whether they know it or not.
Right.
And so that's what I think is really interesting about it, is that, as part of, I mentioned that in my undergrad, I did a lot of like education type things. So I took more of a preventative approach with relationships. And so now, as I'm more in the mental health side of things, which I went for the master's for, now I'm realizing that same approach of preventatives is just like education, because some people don't even realize what either the connections that they have or don't have and the quality of those connections impact it's having on them.
That's so fascinating. It's so interesting to me what education can do for the impact of your mental health and what it can do to impact relationships in general, that communication, that gaining of knowledge. I am curious. So you mentioned that you kind of looked into more of preventative things, and you mentioned that it's a little bit of education, but could you tell us more of what that looks like, more of what that entails, and go a little deeper?
Sure, absolutely. I think when I say education, what I really mean is awareness, knowledge, and without first being aware of something, you can't do something about it, or you can't capitalize on it. And so I think just even having conversations like this is huge, because then you might step back and say, oh, you know what? I hadn't ever thought of that.
Right.
And it's relevant for me, but I never stepped back to think about it before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a huge aspect, because usually when people start thinking about it, it's because they need to be thinking about it, and they're already in a little bit more of a crisis mode. And they're like, oh no, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm panicking now. I'm not prepared for this.
Right.
So if you kind of come from that approach of just, I think for a lack of a better word, I'll say normalizing mental health, normalizing discussion on mental health, normalizing talking about when you're nervous or when you're struggling or when you're having a hard day.
Right.
I mean, even just being in here, I'm sitting here like, oh man, this is my first time, and I'm trying really hard not to be afraid to show you guys that I'm a human.
Right.
Because that is one thing that is very natural to be afraid of, is showing your humanness.
Right.
Yeah.
Being afraid because of that need for connection. We do things that prevent rejection.
Right.
Or that promote belonging. And one of those things might be closing yourself off as a protection. So that's one simple way of just, okay, well, how can I manage these anxieties and these fears of being rejected? Just enough. Like, I don't have to go and do anything outlandish, but just enough to show that I'm a human and provide an opportunity to connect with another human over our humanness.
Yeah.
Right. I love that. And I think it's so important even further to, as people who live around people, to be the person that is a safe environment where people can come and feel comfortable being human, because connections are made between two people. It's not just one person being willing to be vulnerable. It is the two people coming together and both being vulnerable. It is a two-way thing.
Yeah,
Well, and
absolutely.
I think, sorry, tying that into, have you ever read Anatomy of Peace?
It's so good.
It's been
a really
many
good
years,
book.
but I
Right.
have read that one.
What a good
So
book.
basically, they're like, you need to see people as people. But something you mentioned is I need to be willing to show myself as a person.
Right.
And I think that's even, like, going even deeper into that is not only do you have to go and, like, be seeing people as people and loving them and genuinely caring about them, but you also have to be the one that's human. You
Right.
can't be the savior. You can't be the one that's perfect
Right.
all the time, right? And helping everything. You also have to be a person.
And that's really interesting, because I think to take that even a step further, not only do you have to see other people as people and to do that, but you also have to see yourself as a person. A lot of times in mental health, a big problem is not seeing yourself as a person, that you're the one beating yourself up. A lot of the time it is an outside thing or a lack of connection or things like that, but a lot of the time it's yourself not respecting yourself, and so you need to see other people as people. You need to be vulnerable yourself, but you need to see yourself as a person and be okay with your imperfections.
Absolutely. I think that you guys touch on a lot of really important parts. I love that you guys have pointed out, the word safety that you used, because that is what I'm talking about, creating safe spaces to exist as we are, to show up as we are, and to provide that environment for other people. It becomes a chain reaction where it's like, oh, well, I know because you're giving yourself to me, that does help me feel comfortable
Right.
being myself and trusting that you won't reject me for my humanness.
Right.
And to have that willingness to treat yourself as a human, like you're saying, and viewing yourself as a human. I don't want to oversimplify it, but those are likely a lot of the thoughts, related thoughts that people have that prevent them from connection. There's thoughts of like, I'm not worth this. I'm not worthy of love. They will reject me because all of these warts that I have and all of these scars that I have and all of these demons that I see within me that I don't even love. So logically, nobody else will either. And so when that's your belief system, and you don't believe that you're a human who deserves respect and kindness and love and compassion, then it does. So there's lots of different angles that you guys are highlighting that you kind of attack this approach or this topic from, this problem from. And you can kind of start to see how truly relevant connections are to those thoughts and feelings that we have oftentimes.
I think it's cool because what we're talking about right now is having a connection with yourself. Like, not only do you need connection with other people, you also need to be connected with yourself and know what you need and like what you're struggling with and how to be vulnerable.
I had a discussion once. After the discussion, we all went and did some journal entries. But one of the things that I wrote was that happiness is being at peace with your own imperfections. And I think that that's a lot of where mental health and a lot of where this type of thing comes in is having that respect, having that connection for yourself, and understanding that you're human. You make mistakes. You're going to fail stuff. You're going to be imperfect because it's inevitable. Right. And a lot of the time we get caught up, and there's a balance of course, brain chemicals. There's a balance of environment, but we get caught up in being perfect and being, the best, and ignoring the fact that we're human and that we're real. I am curious what you think about social media and its effect on mental health, because a lot of the time we'll talk about how on social media so many people just present their perfect self and they only talk about the good things, and how that can affect people's mental health. So I'm curious your views on that.
I think I have a lot of views on that. I think that I could answer that from a few different directions. First and foremost, I agree that social media, seeing other people's lives, whether they're only presenting their happiest moments or not, it can promote a tendency to compare ourselves to other people. That's also a natural, normal tendency of a human, is to compare and to daydream about what you wish your life was. And so that it can, if you spend a lot of time in that space, then it can definitely elevate those feelings. Another aspect is when you see too much of the raw, heavy stuff, that can also be, you can start to take that on yourself. And not just with your friends presenting their lives, but just anything that you see on social media, conversations or posts about things going on in the world. Although I'm sitting here professing that connections are important, there is, I think the word I'll use is boundaries, that we do have boundaries, and each of our boundaries are different. And I'm not convinced that our brains were intended to consume so much information from all around the world all at once.
Right.
And so it can be very heavy. And so to really connect first and foremost with, as we've talked about, ourselves, and then connecting with, the people who are immediately close to us. And then we reach out even more and go community, and you see that when you feel a sense of community, you feel purpose, you feel belonging, you feel like you're contributing something to something outside of yourself. So it just kind of keeps going and connected from there.
That's interesting. One question, and this kind of goes with the boundaries thing, but is connection with people who are damaging more important than not having any connection at all?
Yeah, this one's probably up for debate. So I'll speak from opinion, and I'll acknowledge that. My opinion is that it depends. It depends because there's a lot of different ways that a relationship could be damaging, or that a connection could be damaging. And so understanding, as you were saying earlier, understanding yourself, what you need, what your thresholds are maybe, what your boundaries are, then that will be really important. Because some people might be able to be in an environment and it won't actually be defined as damaging for them. But if you take that damaging relationship, one might argue that would make you feel more isolated than if you were alone.
Right.
That's because you do value this connection and you want it to be something. And when it doesn't fulfill those needs, it can just, if what you're seeking is to be understood and someone blatantly yells in your face and tells you that you're wrong, then you're going to feel even more misunderstood than just before, when you're like, I'm not understood, but now I'm misunderstood. And that can be really heavy. So I think that's at least one kind of scratching the surface there, how it might be damaging to stay. There's cons for choosing to isolate completely as well, though. So it's really like balance. And I think balance has come to my mind a few times when we've been talking today. It's kind of seeking that balance, and an overabundance of anything probably isn't the most healthy approach.
Right. Me too. That's really interesting. I was thinking earlier about balance as well. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how to incorporate balance into your life? Because it's not necessarily an easy thing, and it's an ideal, but how can we as individuals find the balance between relationships and loving ourselves and things like that?
I think I might want to give this one a lot of thought. I'll take this one home with me, but my initial thoughts are to be aware that there are different parts of ourselves. There are different needs that we have. And for me personally, the parts of myself that I want to be connected to are spiritual, physical, and emotional. And you might call spiritual like anything outside of yourself, whether that's a higher power or a community or nature, just anything outside of yourself. And then physical would be like your relationship with your body, with physical things that you can tangibly touch and engage with and utilize. And then that emotional aspect that obviously is huge and not as obvious because it's not as tangible, it's not as visual, it's not something you can look at and say this, therefore that. But to notice that there's different parts of ourselves, then we can start to recognize when maybe we're feeding one thing and neglecting another.
Right.
Kind of an oversimplistic answer, but you got to know what something is before you can assess it.
Right.
So that's a really good place to start.
I love that.
That makes me wonder, I'm trying to figure out how to form this question, but it makes me wonder how expectations of you can override what you want to do or who you want to be.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you...
But like how the opinions and expectations, like you said, of other people, of people around you, of the outside sources affect what you're thinking inside. Because a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, I am... able to override all things. But no, not all the time. And environment is a really big thing for mental health.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's interesting because what I kind of hear you guys saying at this point is that up until this point, we've kind of been talking about our relationship with others. But now you guys are kind of talking about what is others' relationship to us.
Yeah.
And by that, what I mean is how are they viewing us? How are they treating us? How are they talking to us? What expectations are they placing on us? How flexible are they when we don't meet those expectations? How collaborative are they with creating those expectations? And so it definitely goes both ways. And so to answer your question as I understood it, it is very important to notice those expectations. And they do. I mean, obviously, you guys are teenagers. You have so many expectations placed on you.
Yep.
And some that are in line with what you guys want. And honestly, there's probably some expectations that aren't in line with what you want.
Yeah.
And I think now would be an appropriate time to talk about Dead Poets Society.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of aspects in there that these young men, they feel liberated by this class, by this teacher, because those expectations are removed, these expectations and pressures of becoming this when they grow up or getting these amount of grades. And it's focused more on just beauty and creativity and expression and really finding your voice.
Yeah.
And that in Dead Poets Society, it appears that these young men are very liberated by that approach.
Yeah.
But the inverse of that is true as well. You see that they do feel pressure to conform. They do feel fear of approaching their parents and saying, this is something that I want, because they know that it's not in line with the expectation.
Right.
And so those fears that come with the expectations goes right back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the fear of rejection.
Yeah.
And because from our need for belonging and our need for acceptance, we fear rejection. So we are tempted to conform.
Right.
Because that does perform a function for us. Everything that we do, we could probably step back and say, I might not have wanted to do that, but I did it for a reason.
There was the kid, he was new and he was a little bit quieter. And then I can't remember what the quote was, but he was like, you need to find your yap or whatever it was. And the kid was like, what is going on? And he pulls him up to the front of the class. And he's like, just give it out. Like, and he does it. And then he's like, come on, like, give it more. And just that inspiration to find yourself and to find your inner, like not anger, but like your inner emotions and your inner desire to actually have a connection and to present yourself as a human and somebody who can do something. And then he goes off and recites this whole poem that was super cool. And
so good.
like he was inspired to create something that was from his heart.
Right.
But was originally too afraid to ask.
And I mean, it goes straight back to when we were talking about environment and safety, and that we need to be willing to create that environment that is safe for people to feel like they can express themselves.
Absolutely. I think that has direct ties with what we've been talking about, because what you'll notice in that scene is he is being offered that space to say, let go of your fears.
Right.
Even like puts his hands over his eyes and says, we're not here, just what is in you right now. Yeah. And, for me, viewing this film and this text from a mental health standpoint, I see that and I go, what he's really saying is, listen, I know that you're afraid because you're standing in front of these peers that you want to like you, and you're afraid of what they'll think when you let your heart show, and you want to protect it because your heart is your heart. Right. And so you're doing these things to protect it, but I'm letting you know that it is protected, and I'll keep it safe. Right. Whatever comes out of you right now will be safe. And then, like you said, it was this really beautiful thing.
Yeah. Oh, super good. I love that scene.
Good. On the contrast, though, it's really interesting to look at when all the boys are in their rooms and they're talking about parents' expectations. So they have this classroom, where they're free and where they're safe, but then they go back home and they have various other pressures, or I can't remember who exactly it is, but there's the teachers and the dean, where there's the dean and the other teachers and their parents at home that have those firm and strong and very imposing expectations for these kids that they don't want for themselves. So it's really interesting to see the contrast of that and their conversations talking about various parts.
Yeah. I'm curious for you guys, from that perspective of watching that contrast, what did you notice about how the young men felt or reacted, or how do you imagine that they were experiencing those two different environments?
Right. Well, I mean, there was the one kid, Charlie, the kind of comedic relief, but also just, I related to him the most. But you could tell that when things were kind of like stressful, he was like, oh, come on, like, this is not the life I want to be living, and this is not what I want to be doing. But once he had the freedom to, express himself, he kind of went a little overboard. But it's like, he was finally free to be who he was, and it's relieving. And I've definitely felt that way. I've felt that way in some classes where I've also felt the opposite in other classes, right?
Right.
In seminar with Mr. DeBono, I felt very free in who I want to be, what I want to be doing, you know, and doing the things that I'm really passionate about. But like, and it's not necessarily the mentor's fault, but like math is also like very, like it's very,
it's
you
an
do
adventure.
this thing and it's like, it's not, I don't think it's the mentor's fault at
Right.
all, but it's just a hard subject to be free in because of
Right.
how many rules math actually has.
Yeah.
Right, there's not a lot of liberty to create.
Yeah.
There are rules, there's structure.
I think that for me personally, there have been classes where I've actually found a nice balance of rules and structure, and specifically my chemistry class that I had last year, I was able to, of course there are rules of science, you know, there's the laws of physics, there's the you know, whatever, things that just are fact. But because of the way that we would do labs and the way that we would do various study groups and things like that, he incorporated a lot of that creativity. I'm actually curious, this is slightly off topic, so we don't have to go too deep into it.
Let's go there.
I know, right? Anyways, what is your opinion briefly, on STEAM? Because a lot of people are like STEM, you know, the rules, we've got science, math, technology, all of those things, and a lot of people want to add the arts into it. How do you think that the more strict rules and the creativity balance in education and in mental health?
Yeah, I think that they do. I mean, from speaking from my own experiences and education, I think that when you are provided an opportunity to explore, it provides that safety and confidence that can trickle into all these different areas. And something that should be noted is that your brains are developing right now.
Yeah.
You
Just
know?
a little bit.
Your brains are developing. And I was thinking of that when you were talking about Charlie, because you mentioned that he went overboard.
Yeah.
Like he one might say he overcorrected. But that is part of the process because you're exploring. You don't know yet.
Right.
You are exploring. And I think that when you do explore, you know, there was the other young man who explored, and he had never acted before, but then he went and acted,
Right.
and then it fit. It's like, I just learned something about myself.
Right.
I'm good at this. I feel connected to this community. I feel like I'm giving them a gift because I'm good at this, and you know, and he learned a lot from that ability to learn about himself. That even if people in this situation don't go on to create a career out of it, which my understanding from Dead Poet Society is that was the critique, is you're investing yourself into something that won't sustain you financially in your future.
Right.
But what needs to be said about, and not just arts within school, but just opportunities to explore and learn and create within your own life, you do gain confidence. You gain self-esteem. You gain experience that goes beyond anything. And then that will help you feel like, yes, I know this about myself. I know that I can do a hard thing. I know that I can manage my anxieties. I know that I can step into a crowd. I know that I can work well with people. Therefore, I'll feel confident going into this very professional setting.
Right.
Right.
I might say.
Coming from my own personal perspective, I've worked at McDonald's, and it is very much like rules, and like you do the things that you need to do, and if you're not doing it fast enough, you get yelled at or whatever, and you need to do it fast enough to, you know, satisfy the customer, basically. And there's no there's some creativity involved, you know, but in the actual job and the work that you're doing, it's not. You open a pack of nuggets, throw it in the fryer, put it in a box, and throw it out the window. Like it's the same thing over and over again. And like I ended up quitting, not just because of that reason, but mostly because of that reason, that I wasn't free. And being at school and doing the things that I love, like this podcast and other things, really allowed me to have the freedom to create. I don't know. I related with Charlie from that movie because I feel free when I'm here doing the things that I want to be doing, you know, and not through the expectations of a boss or, you know, even my parents or anything like that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think I've noticed throughout this discussion, but also just throughout my life and through my friends' lives, is that oftentimes when we are given the environment to be creative and when we were given the environment to have that liberty, we tend to be more successful. And I mean, there is plenty of people who are successful in those more constricted environments where they have these expectations. And for some people, maybe that works. But for most of the people that I know, when they are given this safe environment, when they're given the liberty to be creative, to be themselves, they are so much happier and they're so much more successful because they're able to think that anything is possible instead of there's this one line that I have to follow.
Yeah, you guys bring up some more interesting points that I would love to touch on. There is this idea of conformity that is also mentioned in Dead Poet Society, right? Where they mention this idea of, wait, we're marching in a line and I'm noticing that my peers aren't walking the same way, but by the end we are.
Right.
And that's from the sense of wanting to not only fit in, as we've talked already, but to do it the right way. And we start to question our way and we fear that we're doing it wrong. And so when you know ahead of time that there is no wrong way and that there is space to explore, then it is very helpful. And we're talking currently about creativity and exploration, but I'll connect that to connection because what you're doing is you're connecting with yourself. And even people who perform more successful in a high structured and, black and white logical type space, they likely are viewing it as creativity if that's in line with who they are,
right,
and their skill set and their things like that, because that probably excites them,
right.
And so it's just there's different things for different people, and when you connect to yourself and you know what that is, then that's when you see that, okay, well, this is me, this is congruent with who I am and where I can invest myself into, and we can really capitalize on that and feel confident with it.
That was the main point of what's his name? The teacher, the mentor.
I only ever call him Robin Williams.
Right, yeah, Robin Williams. He did such a great job,
man.
but that really ties in. He was trying to get them to connect with themselves.
Right.
Because what they were connecting with was the expectations.
Right.
And he was like, no, you are a person, and you are not who your parents want you to be, but you are who you are now.
Right.
And you need to find your inner voice, and you need to be who you are, and to find the things you love. And he inspired the theater kid to go and, to just do the play and stuff like that.
Connect with the community.
Yeah,
Right.
connect.
Right.
And that's really what he needed, and that's what most of the boys there needed.
Right, and even though he didn't necessarily bluntly say, go be part of the Dead Poet Society and read poems in a cave, he did definitely influence that, and that was them connecting with each other, because it's so important to have friends that are peers and friends on your level, that you're not just like, oh, I know this person who happens to be like twice my age and has their own kids and whatever, or like these little kids, but having people on your own your same level and your same age that understand, and making those connections is so important. And I think it was so helpful for those kids in that story.
Yeah, I hadn't touched on that yet, so thank you for bringing that up. That's honestly one of my favorite parts of connection, is that you feel that you're not alone. You relate to someone, they relate to you. You realize, holy cow, this lived experience that I have, albeit different than this person next to me, is related in the sense that we're humans and we're experiencing this life together, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. And another aspect, this is kind of shifting gears a little bit, but I do want to acknowledge that with mental health, obviously, we haven't talked about some really big things like depression and anxiety and diagnosable. I think everybody to some extent experiences both, but there are many people, about 1 in 4, who are diagnosed with generalized anxiety or major depressive disorder and other diagnoses that are out there. And for them, all of the things that we've talked about are still true. But as it's important to recognize that these are all meant to be resources that are supplemental to each other, and they support each other.
Right.
And I wish there was just one answer for it all, but I really don't think there is. So it's important to recognize that. So I just wanted to put in a little plug and say that it may be difficult. Like, there may be people listening right now thinking, I don't want to connect. I don't have any energy to go connect at all. There's no way. It will take years before I feel safe enough to show somebody who I really am and connect with them on that real level. That is a very real experience for, honestly, probably the majority of people. And so to take what we're talking about today and translate it to something that's applicable to all, it's just being mindful of ourselves and our needs, and being mindful of, I think you had mentioned, being mindful of our worth, and that these things that make us unique, that scare us, and I know this is hard to believe, so just, guys, lean on my belief, right? Until you believe it for yourself, but the things that make you unique is what the world needs. It is what the world needs. It's what the person sitting next to you needs. It's what makes it beautiful and why we need each other. And so to trust that even just a little bit, and of course to find the right people to share that with, is something to be aware of, and to really go about forming relationships and attachments with those people who do see that, who see that in you and help you feel that. There's been so many studies of people who study happiness. And one thing that, I mean, it's funny because, like, you know, they're likely just like, I want to be happy, right? But something that's always on there is that, like, happy people connect with people in person. Happy people disconnect from technology and get outside and connect with the earth, really. Happy people spend money on other people. I always think that one's a funny one. But what they all have in common is that they go two ways. And so when we take that, and it really just demonstrates the inherent need to connect that we all have within us, and that it feels really good. And so when we can, I guess is what I'm saying, the conclusion is that we can find those people who need and do the same and can recognize the same. And the fourth one, there's 5, I forget the 5th one, so I apologize. But the 4th one is happy people are around other people who see that in them and elevate that and are also happy. And so it's a chain reaction. It's really beautiful.
I love that.
Even just to, right now, like, I just met you guys and I'm like, man, but
right.
I feel it. I feel
right.
every single one of your worth. And when you think a positive thing, to share it can go a long way.
Yeah.
Right.
Just as soon as it comes to your mind.
Well, and this reminds me of Aristotle. I love Aristotle.
So
and
good.
he has a chapter in his Nicomachean Ethics that's about friendship, and how there's like 3 different kinds of friends. One who will take advantage of you because you provide something for them, and that's it. And then once you can't provide that for them anymore, they're gone. And then there's another one that just brings you pleasure or happiness. And then once that either peaks or goes away, then, you know, they're not your friend anymore. But there's the 3rd friend, which he defines as the perfect friend, is someone who genuinely wants to find or bring out the best in you. Mm-hmm. And somebody who will, like the teacher in Dead Poets Society, somebody who will bring out that inner voice, someone who will bring out who you are and help you grow onto a path that you need to be growing on for yourself. So
yeah, to like see it when you don't even see it.
Yeah.
Right.
We need people to see it when we don't see it, because we're all, if we haven't already, going to have a time in our life when we just don't see it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not there.
And that's interesting because, like you said earlier, awareness is so important, but a lot of the time we just go about our days and think the same things and have this pattern, and it's hard to become aware without that intervention of either something or someone to kind of guide us there.
Yeah, someone who can see it, who it's like not right in front of their face.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, if you put your hand in front of your face, the listeners can't see me, but you put your hand in front of your face, and it's like, I can't really see you very well, but you pull it back, and it's like, okay, I can see a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So that's one piece of advice, honestly, is to really step back, to diffuse yourself from your thoughts, from your feelings, and instead of like, I am sad, diffuse it a little bit and say, I am feeling sad. You're not sad. You are not sadness. You're not
Right.
sadness. Sadness
Yeah.
is a thing. You are feeling sad. And then you can remove it one step further and say, I'm noticing that I'm feeling sad. And every time that you verbally say that, it can help you kind of feel like, oh, well, now I'm not as consumed in it. I'm not that thing, and I know that because I'm the one observing that feeling. I'm noticing it. And same thing with thoughts. You know, I could think nobody likes me. And then I could say, I'm thinking that nobody likes me. And then I could say, I'm noticing that I'm thinking that nobody likes me. And now it's like, that's an oversimplistic way to say it, but just removing it, that distance, can help you see it a little bit clearer.
Right.
And that's the same thing that people can provide for us, is that ability to slow us down and say, hey, here it is. Let me hold up a mirror, but from an
Right.
outside perspective here.
Right. We always get so caught up in things, and it's important to look at the big picture instead of just focusing on one minor detail that feels like the end of the world.
Yeah, it feels like the end of the world because it is right then. And so
Right.
you just defuse yourself from it a little bit, and you it can help you regulate until you get to a place where it's not as big anymore.
Right.
That's awesome. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today. Before we go, we'd like to have you challenge our listeners with something from this episode that you think they should take away and do.
Ooh, I challenge the listeners. Do they have to do it, or do they have a choice?
They don't get a choice. No, I was kidding.
So, no, they have to do.
What I hope that the listeners do is take one thing. This is going to sound like a cop-out, but it's sincerely what I would like people to do, is to take one thing that they thought of during this episode. That they thought of, man, I really wish ... fill in the blank, and then go and do that thing.
Yeah.
And it could be inward. It could be, man, I really wish that I had a friend like that. Go say hi to someone.
Yeah.
Or it could be, man, I wish I had the guts to tell somebody that I like their shoes. Like, I'm so nervous, and then next week find something and just say the thing. Just kind of do one small thing to step outside of your comfort zone and help provide that space for somebody else to do the same.
That's awesome.
I love that so much.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
And this discussion. And also just inviting us to watch the Dead Poet Society. Because I watched that and it was so good.
It is such a good movie.
Yeah, I related to it a lot and it really helped me.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Just as my, to get through my own things, but also to have a genuine conversation here, which has been good. So
Yeah. And I think that just proves the point.
Yeah.
Right? That when we step back and we talk about real lived experience, and it helps us feel connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It helps us feel connected. It's stimulating and it feels good. We got all those chemicals going on right now.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for having me.
Yeah.
For sure. Thank you guys so much for listening. Just to wrap up here, if you could rate us 5 stars on iTunes, that'd be very helpful with the algorithm. We also have a question and answer on Spotify. And if you want to hear any future episodes, you can answer that. If you want to contact us in any way for new episodes or just anything in general, you can email us at podcast@paradigmhigh.org, or you can DM us at the Paradigm Pod on Instagram.
Awesome. We also have linked down below some resources from Madisen that you should go check out.
Thank you so much for being here, and please keep engaging in the great conversation.